morning. I am doing sort of a different kind of video today. I've had the energy of Tesla coming in really ever since Uranus moved into Taurus. And I know Amanda Ellis has actually channeled Tesla. I love her work. I suggest checking out her videos where she channeled him. But he just came through really strong for me. And I think one of the reasons is that we share a common soul wound. And I'll talk about that later. But today is his birthday. So happy birthday, Nikola Tesla. And I was inspired, of course, to do a Sabian symbol reading for him. And I actually have this book of his, My Inventions, which it's an autobiography that's like a collection of articles that he wrote. And so I read through this again and watched a documentary, which was interesting. Some of the things in the documentary definitely were a little off, I felt like, compared to what he wrote. But one of the things that I think is fascinating about Tesla is that he was really incredibly psychic, but would not say he was. I don't think he ever believed that or entertained that idea. There is a time where he kind of got curious about the spirit world, but he was very logical about everything. And I had some interesting, this journey with him has been like a series of synchronicities, lots of synchronicities, which I'll take you on the journey of. It's a lot. I'm just going to let you know, which is often the case with me. My Mercury likes a lot. So first, I wanted to just read like the first couple of sentences from his book. He says, "The progressive development of man is vitally dependent on invention. It is the most important product of his creative brain. Its ultimate purpose is the complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of the forces of nature to human needs." And this is kind of like the work of the magician, learning how to work with the elements of nature to create. And it's interesting though, he had a little lesson with this that I thought was so funny. He got into the habit of catching crows, and one day he was carrying 2 crows home, and suddenly like this whole flock surrounded him, and they came and started dive bombing him and knocked him down to the street. And all these crows were attacking him, and he never caught a crow again. And so it was really interesting. I just got this new feather deck, and I pulled the raven, and later that day I found a crow feather in the field I was working in. And the message was, the universe is calling you to notice important synchronicities. So that sort of kicked it off, right? Like all these synchronicities. And so I've been following the trail. Something that's really interesting about him, I'm just going to go through a lot of these things that I noticed so you can get like a general background or an idea of his personality. He said he developed his will through discipline. So like he overcame cravings and things that he felt like weren't under his control, and he felt that helped him develop his will to do what he actually consciously wanted to do. And I found that really interesting because I feel like that's a part of the spiritual path. And there's a lot of things that he talks about in his life that relate to that path. His father was a really educated priest, and he was a philosopher. He taught Tesla a lot. And then his mother came from a line of inventors and was very intuitive. And when he was born during a lightning storm. And the midwife said, "This is going to be a child of darkness." but his mother said, no, this is going to be a child of light. And it was really cool as I was getting in touch with Tesla and thinking about his Sabian symbols. We were having a thunderstorm here, and it was lightning, and so it was cool. I definitely, felt his presence. He lost his brother early on in his life, which stuck with him. He said he couldn't erase the memory of that. And actually there's a Sabian symbol we have in common that really shows the theme of this, a widow at an open grave. And it's about releasing grief and sorrow, and how that can be kind of challenging for some. And he experienced a lot of loss in his life as far as like his career went, He was incredibly sensitive. He had like really, really amazing eyesight and almost superhuman hearing. He could hear things that were happening like 3 rooms away. He said when he walked under a bridge, sometimes it would feel like his skull was being crushed. He was just like this incredibly sensitive being, and he had all these strange preferences too. Like he didn't like women's earrings. He was like, bracelets are okay, but I don't like earrings. I don't like hair. Like he had all these really interesting sort of preferences, almost kind of in an OCD way. But I feel like a part of it was due to his sensitivity. And he was kind of sensitive to foods and stuff when he was younger. He also almost died like several times, either through accidents or through being sick. And he said that his intuition really helped him get out of accidents. Like that inventor brain would come on, and he would visualize the physical properties or like the laws of physics that would help him get out of these little, like, finagle his way out of these accidents that he was in. And he valued his work more than anything. He was obsessed, and he valued it even more than money. And he made a lot of mistakes in his business life that way, as a lot of people do who are like super passionate but not necessarily business minded. I definitely relate to him in this way, and with the obsession, like I feel like as I've been working on this, I've just been like, give me all the information, like, he sort of guided me to do that as well. But this man Marconi used his patents and his ideas and took credit for inventing radio technology. And there was a lot of his technology that was used, and yet he died penniless. I mean, he really changed the world. He was ahead of his time. He even knew that. He visualized a lot of inventions that we have today. And again, it was interesting. He didn't really believe in psychic powers. He said there's a couple of funny stories he tells where like he had just known, he had this knowing that Ford was going to come to him and ask him about this motor he invented. And he knew it. Well, they called up one day, and he said to his secretary, see, I told you they were going to call. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, they came in and met with him, and they didn't care at all about his motor. They wanted to research his psychological mind and his psychic abilities. And he threw them out of his office. He was mad. So he didn't like that. And he had a friend who was a spiritualist, because that was really big at this time too, was like the spiritualism, spiritist scene, mediums, that kind of thing. And he started to entertain the idea that maybe some of this was true. And he had this vision of his mother as an angel floating on a cloud, and it was like the angel's face turned to hers, and she looked at him lovingly, and then he heard like a group of angelic voices singing, and he woke up. Well, it turned out his mother had passed away at the time he was having this vision, yet he still rationalized the whole thing away. he remembered a painting he had seen that was like his vision earlier in the day, and he realized that the choir singing was actually a choir in a church, outside his window. And so he still did not accept these ideas, which I just find fascinating. When I channeled him, he gave me a Da Vinci quote. The first thing he said to me was, "Do your homework. Like Leonardo said, study the art of science and study the science of art." And so this is what Da Vinci said to form a complete mind. And I started to think, wow, they have a lot in common, Tesla and Da Vinci. So I looked up their astrological charts together, and it's pretty interesting that their Saturns conjunct each other's south nodes. So I felt that there was this responsibility passed down between them, or they had a certain karma to bring this information to humanity. And it's interesting because it seems almost futuristic, because they were ahead of their time. Like, humanity wasn't really ready for all of their ideas. But this is another theme with these kinds of people. We need people who remember things or can see things from all points in time, because those people are what keep certain concepts alive throughout the ages, because time is not really linear. So maybe our consciousness on a grand scale isn't ready for something, but there's still these characters that come in almost as placeholders so that knowledge doesn't completely get lost. They're kind of like leaving these little breadcrumbs for humanity as our consciousness descends into a denser form, and then as it starts to rise again or expand, we start rediscovering these little breadcrumbs they left behind. And Tesla had Neptune in Pisces, which we have that placement right now. He also had Uranus in Taurus, and what's wild is that his natal chart Uranus is in the exact degree that it is presently. So I thought that was really cool that he came to my attention really strongly with this Uranus and Taurus exact conjunction with his chart, because that is immediately who I thought of when I thought of Uranus and Taurus was Tesla, and it was about using nature's elements to create energy, to create free energy. So something else that Leonardo da Vinci and Tesla had in common was their sleep schedule. This was so interesting because I tried to see if Tesla ever, noted anything of Leonardo's work or was inspired by him or anything like that. And what came up was that they had what is called a polyphasic sleep pattern. So what this is sleeping more than twice a day. Some people sleep all night, maybe they'll take a nap during the day. These two people would just take shorter naps throughout the day so that they would have to sleep less hours, and then they would have more hours of productivity. But ultimately, this led Tesla to having a mental breakdown in his 20s when he was only taking 6 20-minute naps a day, which gave him 2 hours of sleep a day. And after a while, that wore on him. But there's ways to do it a little bit more responsibly where you're getting more sleep. And people think that there are some benefits to it, like having increased lucid dreams. Also having increased memory and learning capabilities. And the thing I thought of immediately was being in touch with that divine inspiration more constantly as you're working. Like, say you're working on inventions, you go to sleep, you might have some visions or get more sort of inspiration from those etheric worlds that you're traveling in during that sleep time. And something else that came up between them was that they both had inventions for autonomous vehicles. So this is like smart cars pretty much, but in Leonardo's time it was a cart that was on a track, but it operated on its own. And it's really interesting because later in Tesla's life, he was thinking about automatons, and I had to look up what an automaton was, because I think we all kind of understand it, but it's good to have a definition. And so the definition is a relatively self-operating machine or control mechanism designed to automatically follow a sequence of operations or respond to predetermined instructions. So it's kind of like another way of saying a robot. But the way Tesla describes it is really interesting. He believed he developed his will when he was younger, and then later in his life, he goes on to say that he doesn't really believe we have free will. He says he believed that we were all automatons, our thoughts and actions merely being responsive to the forces of the environment. And he used this idea of the automaton to see a way, he saw like drones pretty much in his mind. He saw it as a way to be used as warfare to, save more lives, so that soldiers wouldn't have to fight. But then again, you're still using them to kill. And one of his goals was to actually end war. But before I get to that, I wanted to talk about the free will aspect. And so I think that it's really interesting that he had a change of mind or a change of heart. And it really brought me to think that both are true, because, for example, I have this will to learn about Tesla, right? And to figure out how his life applies to mine or applies to us as a collective right now. What can we learn from him? But along this path, all of these synchronicities are happening in my outside environment that are giving me breadcrumbs and leading me to the next step. So, for example, last night, my husband and I have been talking about going to see the new Indiana Jones movie for a while. And he just, I'm doing all this Tesla research, and he's like, what do you want to do tonight? We felt like doing something. He was like, why don't we go to the Indiana Jones movie? Well, when we go to this movie, I'm just having all these synchronicities. So it wasn't something that I consciously decided to do, right? I'm being led by something else and being affected by my outside environment. And so what popped up with this movie was when I was reading Tesla's book, he mentions Archimedes a couple of times, and that name popped out to me because I've never studied Archimedes, and I was like, who is that? I need to look into who that is, And it turns out he's a mathematician and inventor, and he's the one that went running down the streets naked, screaming Eureka when he had a big discovery. And Tesla had moments like that. I think we all have moments like that when we're trying to figure something out or inventing something. I've had a bunch of them through this process of researching Tesla. And so I didn't have time to look into Archimedes, but we go to this movie, and who is one of the big characters? Archimedes. I'm like, what are the freaking chances? Who talks about Archimedes? So that was really interesting. And the other thing that is fascinating is that today, when I went to look up automatons, I find that, okay, if you want to see this movie, I might be giving you a few spoilers, just a heads up. But when I'm looking into automatons, I see that the oldest found example of an automaton is this device called the Antikythera. And it's essentially a sky clock. It's this device that has all these gears. It almost looks like a compass and a clock. And they used it to predict certain planetary alignments and also the cycle of the moon, which is a little, what's the word for it? It's not super, consistent. You know, it changes, and they developed this device to help predict these future eclipses and things like that. Pretty amazing. And it was either built in 200 to 80 BC. That's like the time frame they're looking at. And it was thought that Archimedes had something to do with it. Well, you know, in Indiana Jones movies, they're always looking for a certain artifact. What do you think was the artifact they were looking for in this movie called The Dial of Destiny? It was the Antikythera. So I felt this was a really strong message, this message about automatons. And in this movie, the Antikythera was a time traveling device. And I just love how in these movies, it's always like a super materialistic view of how something works. You know, they sort of block out the esoteric. And it's, what comes up for me are a few things. And I was thinking this during the movie, like they're using this device to travel in time. And to me, I'm thinking we can travel in time, at least in our minds, at any point. And the whole theme that I feel all of this was distilling down to are a couple things. And one is about the automaton. So I had this question come through. Who or what is animating you? Is animating us? Are we aware of the forces that we are inspired by and that we are animated by? Are we conscious of them? And it brought me back to, you know, this thing I've always seen with the leaf. When you look at a leaf, the veins in the leaf look like a tree. The creator lies within its creation. So the other question is, what are you creating? And what are we using in our lives? And who created it? What are their intentions behind creating it? And of course, this leads to a lot of AI, you know, the artificial intelligence stuff. And another thing that this led me to was soul retrieval. We just had this Capricorn full moon, which is a lot about the past. And full moons are for releasing. It's really, with Capricorn, it's a lot about our structures and authority. And so I feel like we're really being asked to forgive things from our past, which is always the case, right? But it's coming up really strong with all of these messages to forgive the people who perpetrated us in the past. For example, Tesla forgiving the people who stole his work. He seemed very compassionate. I don't know if he was super bitter in the end of his life. He was very isolated, and he pretty much just hung out with pigeons. He fed pigeons all the time. And he died alone in his apartment. So I don't know, maybe there probably was a lot to still be forgiven when he passed away, as he was, you know, sort of isolated from the world. So forgiveness is coming up as a big message. And I think a lot of this also has to do with, if you're a person who is aware of the agendas to make people essentially automatons and to control people, you know, we have agendas in the world that people with agendas in the world to do that. Can we release our anger towards them? Can we actually forgive them for wanting to experience that kind of consciousness? Because when we do, they just kind of fall away. They just kind of fade away. The more that you fuel your anger towards those people, the more it keeps the energy alive. And so this is a lot of like deep shadow work and things like that. But, you know, myself included, I feel like there's maybe a lot of us who have fragments around these types of themes, whether it's being controlled by someone, having your will taken away, or even having your work stolen, or being ahead of your time. All of these kinds of little things can be buried really deep within us. And if they are, they will come to the surface in your present life through things that are happening. And it's an invitation to forgive in this present time. Like, even just that, you don't even have to go back to the source, but that's where I was brought back to with this. I had seen some other lifetimes that I've had where I was some sort of inventor and researcher, and my work was stolen. And so I share this sort of theme with Tesla. And so with the Capricorn full moon, it's about releasing those things, looking at them, becoming conscious of them, releasing, forgiving. And then we have a Cancer new moon coming up. And Tesla had a lot of Cancer in his chart, and that kind of explains his sensitivity, his introvertedness, And with this new moon, it's like, how can we clear that inner space? How can we clear this emotional world and make our intentions from that place? From a place that is not fueled by the things that have been perpetuating harm, but fueled by a real passion and fueled from a heart-centered place. So I feel like the message he gave me is very appropriate to read right now. Let me just get a sip of this. So here's what Tesla said to me. Find it. There is an electric thread, not a wire, an invisible thread that runs through us all. We must ground and open to receive it. And the hearts, let me start over. There is an electric thread, not a wire, an invisible thread that runs through us all. We must ground and open to receive it, and we will connect with our hearts and the hearts of others. This electric thread is an unseen dimension that you are increasingly becoming aware of. Keep your lights on and you will find each other. Plug into the earth. You are made of the waters that connect you all. Oscillating at the rate of love, the heart connection, the earth connection will make you light up the world and cast light on all shadows so they may join you. When you connect to the technology of your heart's intelligence, you will be ready for a new world that you wish for. So I thought that was super beautiful, and I think that that's what it's going to take for us to be ready for the technologies that we desire, that sort of free humanity and give us a lot of liberation from, the systems that keep us. I'm trying to be careful with my language here. The systems that keep us, doing what we don't really want to be doing. I think it's time for a lot of us to be freed in this way where we're actually following our heart and being able to do what we want to do and not feel tied down by a lot of expenses that may not really be necessary, that other people are just, profiting off of. Not that profit's a bad thing, but in a way that, if there's a technology we're actually aware of that could benefit a lot of people rather than only benefiting a few, then, I believe those are ready to come forward when we are ready. When we can get over the hoarding and the tendencies like that. And so he says, there's an article in his book called The Road to Permanent Peace. And he says, peace can only come as a natural consequence of universal enlightenment and merging of races. And we are still far from this blissful realization. So he had these very, what we would now maybe call spiritual insights, enlightened insights. And he had a vision of people being connected, an end to war and things like that. And so I'm going to read his Sabian symbols. If you're still hanging out with me, you really love Tesla. Let's see. So, here's his poem. A widow at an open grave, a jewelry shop, a man declared bankrupt, an automobile is wrecked by a train, a very old man facing a vast dark space to the northeast. The germ grows into knowledge and life. A noon siesta. 2 men placed under arrest. A Jewish rabbi. A deserter from the Navy. A table set for an evening meal. A large hat with streamers flying facing east. A young girl feeding birds in winter. And here's his story. We learn the all-important lesson of letting go of grief and sorrow, improving upon nature, since they support our trial and error life processes, and by fully anticipating the irrefutable consequences of our imperfections. Such an ardent path inevitably leads to the discovery of universal eternal truths, and build confidently upon our feelings of having potential, and also learning the wisdom of letting go, to the point of modestly accepting these inevitable consequences of our misdemeanors, follows from a foundation laid down within traditional teachings, as much as is the refusal to comply with inappropriate authority, teaching others what we have ourselves learned, to live with an attitude of gratitude, then guarding our sensitivities, so to access the mystery of being innocent and fearless in love. So, I could go further into breaking all these symbols down, but I highly encourage you, if you are a Tesla fan, to read his book, My Inventions. And all of these symbols make so much sense to me, and I thought it was just really, really cool. And I hope you gathered some of that just from the things that I told you about him. And I'm just going to pull a few cards too. I felt very strongly to pull out certain decks here. I wanted to pull one from my Atlantis. Woo! There we go. For my Atlantis deck. Oh boy. That flew out. Source. Akashic Record Light Activation. So this is what I was talking about time, about this time not being linear, and how our expanded awareness, and he even talks about it, this invisible wire that connects us all, it connects us through time as well. And we can access these memories at any point to, try to heal things from our past, or try to learn more about the shadows that we're dealing with at the time. And of course, because he worked with the forces of nature, I wanted to pull a Sacred Destiny card. It's very nature inspired, and being reminded of something else too. Oh, love. Tapping into the heart. It's the heart space is where that connection is. This actually reminds me of the video I've made about connecting with the elements to become a harmonious creator. It's about brain and heart coherence, which Joe Dispenza writes about. And Tesla was kind of using these techniques, although I find it so interesting that he was so Cancerian, but so logical. Like his brain, he definitely came in designed that way for a reason. And it also is a part of the consciousness of that time. But it feels like with him on the other side now, there's this new awareness of the other side, and of this concept of love. He didn't have that in his life with other people. He had it with his work, and that sort of burnt him, in the end. As I pulled this card, I was reminded of something else about the automatons. So I wanted to pull a card from my Egyptian gods deck, and I was reminded another one of the most ancient forms of an automaton that we have an example of as well, aside from the Antikythera, is Egyptian statues. So the Egyptians believed that the statues were alive, and they would go and they would pray to them and they would ask them questions, and the statues would move and answer their questions. And there's a lot going on energetically, electrically with the temples in Egypt. I feel like the ancient civilizations had that knowledge of really truly using the elements to for their needs, whatever those needs were. And when I was looking into the automatons, there was this poem written by Pindar, and I just really liked it. This is just an excerpt from it. It says, "The animated figures stand, adorning every public street, and seem to breathe in stone or move their marble feet." And I think this also comes back to our sense of belief. There's been like a belief or a trust in magic that feels like it's been lost over these times that we've been developing our mind more. And I'm going to pull an Egyptian god really quick and see what messages we get about this. I feel like I'm getting some other messages as well, but I want to see what comes out. All right. Hathor, intelligence. Oh, interesting. Let's see what she says. Card 14. She is the mother of all women. She is the goddess of love, passion, and beauty. Her parties are orgies of intoxication, joy, and music. She is also associated with childbirth, delivery, and children. She is portrayed as a young woman with cow horns on her head. The sun disk is placed between the horns, which is why she is also called the divine cow. But she also has a destructive side. Try to create pleasant situations and make the most of the moments you experience. In love, Hathor helps to intensify sexuality, the senses, the explosion of life, of everything capable of being born, increase of wealth in all areas, especially material ones. So that is so interesting. I think it's so interesting this card says intelligence. It's about that discernment. There's a lot coming in about this. We went through a phase, humanity's always changing and always learning and always growing and going through these phases. There may have been a time where we had more of a feminine presence, a feminine way of understanding the world. We were tapped into our intuition. And there may have been a time where that became destructive, right? Like not having intelligence or reason. And then that's why we have these different pendulum swings and waves in consciousness where we began to sort of sacrifice some of that clairvoyance and intuition to develop our reason. And it's just a phase of our growth. But we're coming to a time where the intuition and that feminine impulse is returning so we can use both. And it's about balancing the two. We can use our intuition, and then we can also use our intelligence and our reason to not get carried away with things that might be delusional, right? And this gives us this ability to really have a powerful creative ability in the physical realm. A part of that is the imagination, which Tesla talks about. He feels like that's what a lot of scientists are missing, is the imaginal capabilities. That's where a lot of new ideas come from. And it's not just about only looking at the material and only looking at what we've done in the past. It's about innovation. And I think what she's saying here is to be sure that we're tapped into our heart and we're developing from that place rather than just developing from ego or for profit and things like that. And I think that's where humanity is headed. I do. I have a very optimistic outlook about this. And I feel like that's what was trying to come through already before I read her card. It's just about that sort of, it's like a undulation or it's a back and forth motion. It's a wave motion of how we shift, as a collective in our consciousness. And we're coming to this point where we're really starting to find more balance, hopefully. Many of us are. And again, that forgiveness is something that will help us find that balance as well. Okay, I'm going to pull one more from my Sacred Geometry deck because this just feels appropriate for all of these. Sorry, Chappie's dreaming and he's like doing a little bark in his sleep. It's really cute. Okay. Receiving. Ooh. 64. Look at this too. This looks like the Antikythera to me. That shape in the middle. It's like a dial. It's almost like it's interesting, these shapes. You've got like it feels very like masculine and feminine together. And it's this Taurus field. Look at her brain. It's like electricity coming through her body and her DNA being activated. Let's see what this card has to say. $64. Readiness, receptivity. Ooh. This is the final card in Sacred Geometry. Sacred Geometry cards for the Visionary Path. Embedded in the background of this image is stunning geometry that appeared as a crop formation in 2003. The figure is charged with readiness and receptivity. Her outstretched arms and open hand chakras are expressions of trust, openness, and infinite potential. She is a lightning rod and a receptor of universal information and infinite wisdom. DNA spirals appear as pillars or antennas in support of her readiness. This card celebrates the transformation that is taking place in our experience of reality and our willingness to shift from the separation of duality consciousness to the certainty of our connectedness with all that is. Sacred geometry is one way that information and energy are entering consciousness at this time. You are gaining a greater appreciation for and are participating in the evolution of consciousness. As you continue your visionary path, allow your awareness and understanding of sacred geometry to nurture this evolution. Let this card be a signpost of your willingness to become a beacon of hope and a guiding light for those still caught in the old paradigm of separation. Remain receptive to the messages you're receiving and give thanks for your conscious participation. Wow. Woo-hoo-hoo! Love that. This is such a beautiful message. And I also just love how it's saying we're ready. Like if we're just open to receive and we're ready to let go of this old paradigm of the separation and the bitterness and the anger, we can really move forward. And there's a lot of things in culture that are trying their hardest to keep us in separation. I saw that in the previews to the movie we went and saw last night. I felt like I was living in a different reality for a minute. And, it really comes back to nature. And these sacred geometrical patterns are all throughout nature. We don't have to look very far to recognize them. All we have to do is become the observer, really become a strong observer of what's happening around you, using that sense of wonder to be curious. So I want to thank Tesla so much for these beautiful messages, and I just feel so, just gets me all excited, gets me jazzed for the future, which we could use more of that, right? So happy birthday, Nikola Tesla. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day and really tap into your heart to keep creating your inventions, whatever that is. It could even just be like a meal you're cooking, but doing it from this place that's really inspired by the joy of life and appreciating the people around you and this heartfelt space, So sending you so much love.